All right, so you know how you send in that interview with John Wheeler, the author of The Light Behind Consciousness?
Yeah.
Well, get ready, because we're going deep on this one. It's a real mind bender, this whole idea of non-duality.
It's a big one for sure. Really makes you question everything you thought you knew.
I know, right?
Uh,
Like, one of the things that really got me was how Wheeler was talking about this fundamental reality, like
Right.
a truth that underlies everything.
Right.
And the thing is, it's not separate from us. It's not like we're just observing the universe from outside.
Yeah, more like we're a part of it, all interconnected.
Exactly. Like ingredients in some kind of cosmic soup.
Yeah. We think of ourselves as separate individuals, but that might be an illusion.
And all the suffering we experience.
hmm
Wheeler suggests it comes from clinging to that illusion, all that striving, all that wanting.
It's like chasing a mirage, he says.
Totally. And this idea, it's not just some fringe theory, right?
Not at all. Think of Buddhism, Hinduism, even Christian mysticism. They
Mm.
all point to this underlying unity.
Oh, that's right. So it's a concept that's been around for centuries.
Exactly. And it's fascinating how these different traditions approach the idea.
Like Wheeler mentions Meister Eckhart, the Christian mystic. He talks about the uncreated light.
It's like different cultures and philosophies are all circling around the same profound truth, just using different language.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connections here. But if we're all part of this one reality, this uncreated light, then what about all the differences we see in the world? I mean, we all feel unique, right?
Of course, of course. But non-duality doesn't deny those differences.
Oh, okay.
It's more about seeing those differences within a larger context of unity.
Okay, so maybe like think of waves in the ocean.
Exactly. Each
Yeah.
wave is distinct. Yeah. But they're all part of the same ocean.
Okay, yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
But how do we actually experience this unity? In a real way?
Right. And Wheeler uses this great analogy in the interview about tasting a meal versus just reading the menu.
Ah, yeah, I remember that. Such a good point.
So many people get caught up in the intellectual understanding of non-duality. They read about it, they debate it, but...
But they never actually experience it directly.
Exactly.
It's like we're so focused on reading reviews of some amazing restaurant, we never actually go and taste the food.
Perfect analogy. We mistake the map for the territory.
So how do we move beyond the menu and actually taste the meal? How do we go from an intellectual understanding to a real experience?
That's the big question, right? And Wheeler doesn't lay out a step-by-step process.
Right.
He talks more about sincere inquiry, turning inward and investigating the nature of your own experience.
He even talks about a time when he was trying to fly the plane before it's built, as he puts it.
Right.
What do you mean by that?
Well, he was so focused on seeking understanding, like trying to achieve some future state of enlightenment, that he missed the essential foundation of direct experience.
Ah, I see. It's like you can't run before you can walk.
Exactly.
So it's less about adding something new and more about recognizing what's already here.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a real challenge because it's not about acquiring more knowledge.
It's about a fundamental shift in perspective.
Exactly.
Okay, I think that's starting to make sense. But if there is no separate self, like non-duality suggests, then who's doing the looking? Who's having the experience? This is where my brain starts to melt a little.
Yeah, that's a very common question, and it really highlights the paradoxical nature of non-duality. And actually, someone asked Wheeler that very question in the video.
Oh, really? What did he say?
His response was brilliant, if a little cryptic. He said that if the understanding of no self is genuine, the game is over. There are no more questions.
Whoa. Okay, so that's a lot to unpack. So it's not really a question we can answer with our usual way of thinking.
Exactly. He's pointing to the fact that this understanding is beyond concepts. Just like sight. We don't ask who's seeing when we look at something. We simply see.
So it's about direct experience rather than trying to figure it out in our heads.
Yes. And the funny thing is, you already know this truth intuitively. Think about your sense of being, that feeling of I am.
Yeah.
It's not something that comes and goes like a thought. It's the constant backdrop of all your experiences.
That's true. It's always there, even if I'm not thinking about it.
Exactly. And that sense of being, that's what non-duality is pointing to. It's not some far-off state of enlightenment.
It's the reality of this moment.
Yes.
Okay, that's starting to click for me.
Yeah.
But if we're already whole and complete, like non-duality suggests, then why do we still experience so much suffering?
Well, Wheeler says suffering has a cause that never existed.
Yeah.
It's like a mirage. We create the illusion of suffering through our belief in a separate self.
So we're chasing a phantom. something that doesn't actually exist.
Exactly. And as we chase that phantom, we just create more suffering.
So what's the way out of this cycle?
That's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. So escaping this cycle of suffering, right, caused by this illusion of a separate self, how do we even begin to break free from something like that? It's so deeply ingrained in how we see the world.
Well, Wheeler doesn't exactly give us a step-by-step process, does he?
Right. It would contradict the whole idea of letting go of those fixed concepts.
Exactly.
He talks about it more as an ongoing investigation, a willingness to question your assumptions, to really look deeply at your own experience.
Yeah, he keeps emphasizing the importance of what he calls clarifying these fundamental points, like really getting to the core of who we are.
Yes. He's saying, don't just accept what you've been told. Go and see for yourself. See the truth of what he's pointing to.
Like, don't take my word for it. Go investigate.
Exactly. And he even cautions against, prematurely claiming you've reached some ultimate understanding.
Because that would just be another form of clinging.
Right.
Right, another concept to grasp onto.
Exactly. He says if someone claims to have realized non-duality, but they're still experiencing, seeking, suffering, and doubt,
Yeah.
it's a sign they're clinging to a concept rather than actually embodying the truth.
It's like claiming you've reached the top of the mountain while you're still climbing.
Perfect analogy. It really highlights the difference between intellectual understanding and actual realization.
So it's not about becoming some kind of enlightened being.
Right.
It's about recognizing a truth that's already present.
Yes. And that recognition can be incredibly freeing. Like Wheeler talks about how it can totally transform our relationship with suffering.
Oh, instead of trying to constantly escape from it,
Yeah.
we see it for what it is,
Yeah.
an illusion created by our own minds.
Exactly. It's like that mirage we were talking about earlier, remember?
Yeah.
The suffering only appears real because we believe in that separate self.
So how do we stop chasing the mirage?
Well, Wheeler encourages us to turn inward.
Inward.
Yeah, to examine the nature of our own experience.
But wouldn't that just reinforce the sense of a separate self? The very thing we're trying to transcend.
That's where the subtlety of this investigation comes in. It's not about analyzing your thoughts and feelings like they belong to some separate me.
Okay.
It's more about simply observing the nature of experience itself.
That sounds, I don't know, kind of abstract. Can you give an example? What might that look like in practice?
Sure. Let's say you're feeling, a sense of contraction, like a tightness in your chest.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Typically, we might label that as anxiety, right?
Yeah.
Or fear or some other negative emotion. And what do? We try to push it away.
Which usually just makes it worse, right?
Exactly, because now you're resisting your own experience.
Yeah.
But through the lens of non-duality, we can simply observe that sensation, without all the labeling, without the judgment.
So instead of saying, I'm anxious, you just notice there's tightness in my chest.
Exactly. And as we practice this kind of open awareness, we begin to see those sensations for what they really are.
Which,
Just arising and passing phenomena. They don't define us.
so even though the sensations are real, the suffering we create around them, that's optional.
Exactly. And as we loosen our grip on those stories, on that sense of me as this separate suffering entity, it begins to dissolve.
But isn't there a danger in that? Like, if we let go of the sense of self completely,
Yeah.
what's left to motivate us?
That's a common concern. But Wheeler suggests that when we see through that illusion of a separate self, we don't become, apathetic or inactive.
Really?
Yeah. Instead, we're actually freed to engage with the world in a more authentic way, a more meaningful way.
Because our actions are no longer driven by fear and insecurity.
Exactly. We're not trying to protect the separate self anymore. And this is where the connection to spiritual traditions gets really interesting. A lot of practices like meditation or mindfulness, they're designed to help cultivate this kind of non-dual awareness.
So it's not just about thinking about non-duality. It's about embodying it in our lives.
Precisely. And as we embody this understanding, we start to experience the interconnectedness of all things in a much more direct way. We realize that our well-being, it's inseparable from the well-being of others.
That sounds beautiful,
Yeah.
but also kind of daunting. It's a huge shift in perspective.
It is. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process, like an awakening, peeling back the layers of conditioning and belief that have been obscuring our true nature.
Wheeler even talks about the importance of not clinging to the idea of, like, having the understanding.
Right, exactly. It's not something you possess. You don't achieve it. It's a recognition. an ongoing process of seeing through that illusion of separation.
He also cautions against turning non-duality into some kind of belief system or dogma.
It's not about adopting a new set of ideas.
Right.
It's about directly experiencing the truth of what already is.
And he really encourages us to be wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers or who can give you enlightenment.
It's not something that can be given or received.
Oh, I see.
It's a realization that unfolds naturally through your own investigation, through your own practice.
So it sounds like a very personal journey.
Absolutely. Even though it's pointing to this universal truth,
Yeah.
he really emphasizes that the path to liberation is a personal one. Each of us has to find our own way.
So, one of the biggest things I keep coming back to with this whole non-duality thing is this idea that if we let go of the self, like if there's no me driving everything,
Yeah.
what's left to motivate us? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that. It's a natural question to ask. It's like, if there's no me striving and achieving, why even bother getting out of bed in the morning?
Exactly.
Wheeler actually addresses this in the interview, and his response is pretty funny. He basically says, if the understanding of no self is genuine, the game's over. There are no more questions.
So he's saying we can't even approach this with our normal way of thinking.
Exactly. We're so used to thinking in terms of a separate self, a doer making choices.
Right.
It's hard to imagine how anything would get done without that, you know?
Yeah. But isn't he suggesting that actions still happen, even without a separate self directing them? It's like asking who makes the sunrise.
Great analogy. He's pointing to the natural flow of life, the way things just happen.
Right.
Without a separate me needing to control everything.
I don't know if you've experienced this, but it's like when you're really absorbed in something, like playing music or painting, you kind of lose track of time. And that sense of self, things just flow.
Exactly. And there's often a sense of joy and ease in those moments because you're not caught up in that struggle of trying to make things happen.
So it's not that we become passive, but our actions come from somewhere else, like a deeper intelligence. Is that what you're saying?
That's the idea. And again, it's interesting how this connects to spiritual practices like meditation or mindfulness. They're all about cultivating this kind of non-dual awareness, that ability to act from a place of presence, of interconnectedness.
So it's not just about intellectually grasping the concept. It's about actually living it, right?
Yeah, precisely. It's like Wheeler's emphasis on direct experience. You can't just read about non-duality. You have to taste the meal, you know?
That makes me think of that question someone asked in the video. If there is no self, then who is looking?
Yeah, and remember, Wheeler says if the understanding of no self is genuine, the game's over.
Right, right. No more questions.
He's showing how limited language and concepts are, you know? They can't fully grasp this.
So it's something you have to see for yourself.
Absolutely. That's what makes this whole exploration so exciting. It's not about adopting some new belief system or following a set of rules.
Right.
It's about a radical shift in perspective, a direct experience of reality. And that can totally transform your life.
It makes me think back to what we were discussing earlier. What does it mean to be free if there's no person to be free?
Maybe it means recognizing that the freedom we're looking for.
Yeah.
It's not something we achieve, it's something we already are.
So we've been searching for something that's been right here all along.
Exactly. And the more we let go of those beliefs about who we are, the more we experience the freedom and the joy that's our true nature.
So this whole deep dive into non-duality, it's really an invitation to wake up, isn't it? To see the reality of this moment.
Yes. And to see that this moment, this experience, it's already filled with infinite potential, like that uncreated light we were talking about.
It's like we're being asked to just let go of the oars and trust the current.
Beautiful way to put it. And maybe as we surrender to that current, as we let ourselves be guided by something bigger, we'll discover that life is way more magical and mysterious than we ever imagined.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what final thought would you leave with our listeners today?
I just remind you that realizing this non-dual reality, it's not about finding something new. It's about recognizing what's already here. And that's something you can only discover for yourself.
It's an invitation to explore, to question, to experience life in a fresh way. And who knows what you might find along the way. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.